Well, hi there. I want to talk to you about higher order questioning and how it's going to relate to your role as a discussion facilitator and as an interviewer in this class. Now, one of the purposes of having you facilitate discussions in the course is to have you participate in what's called inquiry. The goal of the inquiry method is to help you become more aware of your thinking, to analyze information, and to become a critical consumer of the course content. In order to participate successfully in the inquiry process, though, you really have to ask good questions. So this leads us to ask the question, what makes a question good, right? And to better understand information, we have to think critically about the information. So in order to think critically about the information, we have to ask the right type of question. So I want to talk today about two ways to make a question better. Okay, we won't say good, but we'll say better. The first part of questioning looks at the type of question. Is it an open question or a closed question? Now, an open question is going to invite discussion because they have multiple answers, they encourage many viewpoints. Closed questions, in contrast, have a limited or even no real discussion potential because they're essentially just a yes or no question, or there's a specific right answer. For example, did you like it? The answer really is yes or no. Now, frequently we'll say why, but unless we ask why, we're really asking a yes or no question. Or a question like, do all birds fly? Again, really, it's a yes or no question. By asking open-ended and higher levels of questions, your knowledge is deepened. You create connections to the information, and that in turn prepares you to make other connections from material in this class to that in other classes. Now, to help you in forming higher levels of questions, I want to share with you a framework that's called Costa's Levels of Questioning. Costa presents this framework with the image of a multi-level house. On the first level, which is the lowest level, it requires you to gather information. Here you might identify, list, define, or describe something. The information is usually found in a textbook or by Googling. It asks for facts about what you're learning about. This is important information, but since you can glean most of this information from simply reading, there's not much potential for discussion with this level. Level 2 is where we move into better discussion questions. In level 2, the middle level, you're processing information. Here you rely on facts, but you infer information. You also break down information, combine it in a new way. There might still be right answers here, but there's also potential for more discussion. In level 3, the highest level of questioning, you have to apply the information. Here, you have to push beyond the information that's been presented in the text, and it really asks you to make judgments about the information presented. You might also give opinions, judge the validity, or evaluate information. So I want to give you some examples based on the readings you'll be doing this week. Some possible level 1 questions, which you should definitely be pulling from the text as you read, might include, what is resilience? How does Boss define families? What are some common misconceptions about resilience? How is resilience formed? What are some of the myths of resilient families? What is family stress? What is context? And many, many more questions could come from the chapters that you're reading. Now, the thing is, though, is that you can find all of these answers in the textbook, and there's really not a lot of discussion opportunity around these questions. So now I want you to look at some possible level 2 questions. And here's where we have the chance to move the content in a different direction. So if we look at the first question, it says, explain the difference between crisis, stress, and strain. What's the impact of each of these for families in general? How have you seen the difference in each of these in your own family or families with whom you work? So this question is a little bit more complicated. It's more wordy, but it requires you to already know the definition of crisis, stress, and strain. And the right answer isn't going to be to define the three. It's going to be really to talk about the differences, right? So you're explaining, you're applying, you're looking at that information from a different viewpoint. Now the next one, analyze the difference between internal and external context. What are some of your internal and external contexts? This asks you to analyze the information rather than just define it, and again, it applies it to your life. Notice the verbs I'm using, analyze, explain, apply. These are all the verbs that are listed on Costa's level 2. Finally, I want to look at some level 3 questions. Or actually, we're just going to look at one level 3 question. These questions can be difficult to write, and it can be difficult to discuss if we don't have a foundational understanding. So let's go back to one of our level 1 questions. What are some of the myths of resilient families? Perhaps what we really want to talk about here is why those myths matter. Which ones have you bought into? What happens if someone working with families or the family itself buys into one or more of the myths? Can you think of some other questions that might be asked here about these myths and the impact of these myths? See what's happening here? You're moving from a basic list of myths to hypothesizing about why they matter or what would happen if they buy into these myths. Now, I find that even in using higher order level 2 and level 3 questions, there's still a level of follow-up and additional questioning that has to happen. I can ask the first question, but after 2 or 3 people contribute, we'll start to see saturation in the answers. Everyone starts to say the same thing. This is a problem we often see in online discussions, especially if someone isn't redirecting or facilitating the conversation. So what do? We just let everyone keep answering? Well, as a facilitator, you can pose a new question, which is always a viable option. Or you can dig deeper into that existing question and some of the answers using the Socratic method. The Socratic method of teaching is based on Socrates' theory that it's more important to enable students to think for themselves than to merely just fill their heads with the right answers. Therefore, he engaged his pupils in dialogues by responding to their questions with questions instead of answers. This process encourages divergent thinking rather than convergent, meaning perhaps we can all come up with some different answers. These open-ended questions allow you to think critically, analyze multiple meanings, and express ideas. Socratic questioning asks you to do one of 6 things: clarify your thinking, challenge assumptions, provide evidence, look at alternative viewpoints, consider implications, or simply question the question. Questions you might see include, could you explain that further? Is this always the case? What's the counter argument for this? And then one question that I love, why is this question even important? Why do we care? The key here is that dialogue is exploratory. It involves the suspension of biases and prejudices. We have to put our own personal opinions out of it. And we have to show respect by carefully listening, or in our case, reading. You're encouraged to paraphrase essential elements of another's ideas before responding, either in support or in disagreement. Now, it's my hope that as we practice facilitating online discussions in this class, you'll leave with a feeling of community, a feeling that you've connected to your peers because you've had true conversations with them, and that you also leave with a stronger understanding of the course material, and finally, that you feel confident in leading discussions both online and in the real world.